about money giving. Now, we were talking about the system of the church, and I always want to reiterate that to begin with. If we were operating the church by the New Covenant principles, we would meet in small groups of equals. Equals. We're not supposed to exercise authority one over another among ourselves. So we would meet together as brothers and sisters, and in the context of the meeting, it's clear that the New Covenant tells us we all have a priesthood. Okay, all of us have a priesthood, and all of us have a ministry. And in the context of a meeting, anyone could speak or pray or teach, prophesy. Okay, those are the things that all of us are supposed to be free to do when we meet. God in the New Covenant says He's going to speak through whoever He wants to. So we should all be allowed to speak and teach with one another, not just one person over and over again. Okay? Now, the most important purpose of the meeting is to spread the gospel, to invite unsaved and unlearned people into the meetings, or to send people out actively to witness the gospel. It's an ongoing thing with God. We're supposed to get together and ask Him. He's the head. He's the only one who's supposed to have authority, the only potentate. So we're supposed to get together and let Him lead us in the gospel. That's how Christians should meet, or would meet in the New Covenant terms. We've seen how in history people have changed those things. What's interesting, and an interesting point in history, is to understand that we were shifted over into following the format of the church service in the 2nd or 3rd or 4th century. And in fact, by the 4th century, the church service became a Roman law and was forced on people. Now, an important part of that Roman law soon became the concept that Christians need to bring tithes and offerings into the church service, and they're owed every week. So again, let's think of what your definition is of tithes and offerings. Isn't it money you owe the church because you go there every week and it has to be paid repetitively over and over and over again for your whole life, apparently, and you should bring your kids in and teach them to make offerings into the church? Isn't it money? Well, we were looking for a definition like that in the New Testament or in the Old Testament. You really can't find that directly. But what you can find is the fact that the typological basis for all that comes from the Old Covenant. It comes from the sacrificial laws in the Old Covenant. Now, I want to deal with a couple of little tricks that are in there, things where people get confused. And one of them is this concept that ministry equals money. Most Christians say, and I think one of the main reasons most Christians don't think they have a ministry to do for God, or have a ministry gift, or would think that they can function as an apostle or a prophet or evangelist, pastor or teacher, is because we have this huge equation that we see every week, and not just in church, on Christian television, and nearly everywhere we see Christianity, and the equation is ministry equals money. In other words, if you're in ministry, you're someone who makes money from other Christians. I think it's a huge wrong equation, but it's confusing a little bit, because the New Covenant says that if someone is ministering, they do have the right to ask for support from other Christians. What we're missing is that whole system of the church in the New Covenant that says, that says that everyone should have a turn or to minister. That's the problem we have. You see, we have tradition places one person in ministry as if they are a high priest or in a certain order, delegated, designated authority position, and then we pay that same person week after week after week. That's not in the Bible. That's not in the New Covenant at all. In the New Covenant, Paul mentions the fact that them that witness the gospel could have the right to live of the gospel. Okay? Now, consider that. In the New Covenant church, just to say, but the only people who ever collected or did receive support while they were ministering were apostles, where people were actively witnessing the gospel. So if we were operating the church by New Covenant principles, 100% of what we give would go directly to the gospel. Okay? They weren't giving to themselves. In other words, they weren't giving to build a building to meet in, or to have one person who, as we say, entertains them, does good ministry on an altar, and we watch it every week over and over again. That's not what they were doing in the New Covenant. They were meeting as groups of equals, small groups, many, many small groups. Within those small groups, anyone at any point, as God led, could be led to by God and to minister. Now, praying or teaching or prophesying wasn't a paid ministry. It was something that anybody could do, according to the New Covenant, because the gift of the Spirit, the manifestation of the Spirit, is given to every man to profit withal. The the prophecy and the words from God were coming, the teachings from God, the teachings that they would receive in the Bible. In other words, if you're in a small group and you had a letter or a gospel of Mark or John or something like that, they would sit down and read it together. If you're in a small group, you don't need one person to interpret it for you and be over you in authority. You just need to sit down and read the thing, you know. And that's what I'm always suggesting, Christian. Get together and read the thing and understand what it says. That's the way they did it in the Bible. It's easy to understand the Bible in those terms. You don't have to have one person teach you all the time. But when they did give, and were supposed to give, yes, they would give to people whom they sent out with the gospel. So giving was going toward the gospel. They were giving toward the poor within the church and without the church. They were giving, you know, so giving is part of Christianity. I'm not saying there's no such thing as giving, but there was no rule of tithes and offerings, repetitive money giving just to the leader of the church who did all his ministry toward you. I mean, that's just the way the world works. No, we're supposed to give and not know what our right hand and our left hand is doing. So by doing that, we're supposed to give to someone who goes and brings goods to the poor. We're supposed to be giving ourselves directly to the poor. Those are part of the gospel ministries in the new covenant. This, you know, Luke chapter 4, verse 18 and 19, Jesus said he came to bring the gospel to the poor. You see, so he's there to feed the poor, and that's what they were doing. They were bringing the gospel to the poor and helping folks. So yes, someone who is serving God, a minister, does have the right to ask for others for ministry, but if we were using the system in the New Covenant Church, we all could get turns ministering and serving God. Maybe this week I'm going to be sent out by God to go and help some folks. Well, you know, God wants me to go to, me and two other people in the group, to go down to a certain place and witness to some people that we know. Okay, you know what, we need, let's bring them some food, you know, okay, let's collect up and let's make a collection. And that's what they were doing. The Bible in the New Testament said the collection was for the saints. That means for everybody, right? It's interesting how the Dark Ages Catholic Church took on and controlled the definition of who a saint was. They were controlling who got money. Who, oh no, only the saints get money. That means put money in front of a statue. That doesn't mean that. The collection was for the saints. It meant everyone could participate in the collecting of money for their own needs, but not just for their own needs. They were given to the poor within the church, but for the ministry needs of that God led others to have. So you needed to go and witness or minister to others. You could take part of the collection and do that. But it wasn't just my turn, because this week it's my turn, next week it's your turn maybe. Because in the New Testament church, everyone was allowed to minister, and we took turns. That's what the order that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, it says you all may prophesy, so all of us may minister, but do it one at a time, you know, take turns. And that's the way all ministry was being done. There wasn't one person who did it week after week after week who collected everything. Okay? So, now you look at that, and again, you know, you look at it, for example, in one of the places where there's a ministry mistake in the New Covenant, or money ministry mistake, is in Acts chapter 4. At the end it says that they collected money, and people, or some people sold what God was leading them to sell and brought it and laid it at the apostles' feet. And people say, see, they laid it at the apostles were the leaders of the church, and they collected. And tradition has always placed certain people who we see collecting money as rulers of the church. You know, that was done in the Dark Ages. As I mentioned, the Dark Ages Catholic Church collected tithes. You know, there's a grand history of tithe. You know, well, it's not so grand. That was a lot of corruption in that, but I'll talk about that in a minute. They laid money at the apostles' feet. What was that all about? Well, read the rest of the verse. It says, and distribution was made to everyone who had need. So again, the collection was for the saints. Yes, they were doing it by letting the apostles distribute it. And then later on it says the apostles took that job and gave it to some other folks because they were too busy and they wanted to do other things. So you see, it wasn't something that they held as a permanent position of authority that they collected the money. Now I do want to mention something. This is another aspect, and we're going to talk about this in a second. I think